We are made of time. We are its feet and its voice. The feet of time walk in our shoes. Sooner or later, we all know the winds of time will erase the tracks. Passage of nothing, steps of no one. Voices of time tell of the voyage. Oriol Val, who works with newborns at a hospital in Barcelona, says that the first human gesture is the embrace. After coming into the world at the beginning of their days, babies wave their arms as if seeking someone. Other doctors who work with people who have already lived their lives say that the aged at the end of their days die trying to raise their arms. And that's it. That's all. No matter how hard we strive or how many words we pile on, everything comes down to this. Between two flutterings, with no more explanation, the voyage occurs. Witnesses. The professor and the journalist walk in the garden. The professor, Jean-Marie Pelt, stops, points, and says, "Allow me to introduce you to our grandparents." The journalist, Jacques Girardon, crouches down and finds a ball of foam peeking out from the blades of grass. The ball is a town of microscopic blue algae. On very humid days, the blue algae allow themselves to be seen. They look like a wad of spit. The French journalist wrinkles his nose. The origin of life isn't what we might call attractive, but from that spittle, from that mess, come all of us who have legs or roots or wings. Before there was a before, when the world was barely a baby, without color or sound, there was blue algae. Streaming oxygen, they gave color to the sea and the sky. Then one fine day, a day that lasted millions of years, some blue algae decided to turn green, and bit by tiny bit, the green algae begat lichens, mushrooms, mold, metastasis, and all the color and sound that came later, as did we, to unsettle the sea and the land. Other blue algae preferred to carry on as they were, and still are. From the distant world that was, they observe the world that is. What they think of it, we do not know. Greeneries. When the sea became the sea, the land was still nothing but naked rock. The lichens, born of the sea, made meadows. They invaded the kingdom of stone, conquered it, turned it green. That happened in the yesterday of yesterdays, and it is still going on. Lichens live where no one lives. On the frozen steppe, in the burning desert, on the peaks of the highest mountains. Lichens live only as long as the marriage lasts between an algae and her son, the mushroom. If the marriage breaks up, the lichens break down. Sometimes fighting and disagreement led the algae and the mushroom to part. She complains that he keeps her hidden from the light. He says she makes him sick, feeding him sugar day and night. Footprints. A couple was walking across the savannah in East Africa at the beginning of the rainy season. The woman and the man still looked a lot like apes, truth be told, although they were standing upright and had no tails. A nearby volcano, now called Sadaman, was belching ash. The rain of ash preserved the couple's footprints from that moment through time. Beneath their gray blanket, the tracks remained intact. Those footprints show that this Eve and that Adam had been walking side by side. At a certain point, she stopped, turned away, and took a few steps on her own. Then she returned to the path they shared. The world's oldest human footprints left traces of doubt. A few years have gone by. The doubt remains. Time plays games. It's said that once upon a time, two friends were admiring a painting. The work of art by who knows who was from China, a field of flowers at harvest time. One of the friends, who knows why, fixed his gaze on a figure in the painting, one of many women with baskets gathering poppies. She wore her hair loose, flowing over her shoulders. At last she returned his gaze, let her basket fall, held out her arms, and, who knows how, carried him off. He let himself be taken, who knows where, and with that woman he spent nights and days, who knows how many, until a gust of wind picked him up and returned him to the room where his friend remained standing before the painting. So brief was that eternity that the friend had not noticed his absence, and neither had he noticed that the woman, one of many women in the painting, gathering poppies in their baskets, now wore her hair tied at the back of her neck. Time takes its time. He is one of the phantoms. That's what the people of Santa Eli call the handful of old men, knee-deep in the mud, grinding stones and scraping sand in an abandoned mine that doesn't have a cemetery because even the dead don't want to stick around. Half a century ago, a miner from far away arrived at the port of Guyana and set out to find the promised land. In those days, Santa Eli was a garden ripening with golden fruit, where gold fattened many a starving stranger and sent him on his way back home, if the fates so wished it. But the fates did not so wish it. The miner from far away is still here, wearing no more than a loincloth, eating nothing, eaten by mosquitoes. In the search of nothing, he stirs the sand day after day, seated beside his pan, under a tree even skinnier than he, that barely offers any defense against the biting sun. Sebastião Salgado reaches the lost mine, where no one visits, and sits at the miner's side. The gold digger has only one tooth, itself made of gold. When he speaks, the tooth shines in the night of his mouth. "My wife is very pretty," he says. He digs out a blurry, dog-eared picture. "She's waiting for me," she says. She is 20. For half a century she's been 20, somewhere in the world. Shipwrecked words. After dark, Abel de Alencar worked away at his forbidden task. Hiding in an office in Brasilia, night after night, he photocopied the military's secret archive, reports, dossiers, and files that called torture interrogation and murder confrontation. In the 3 years of clandestine labor, Abel photocopied 1,000,000 pages. The documents were a fairly complete confession by the military dictatorship then living out the final days of its absolute power over the lives and miracles of all Brazil. One night, among the papers pulled from the files, Abel found a letter. The letter had been written 10 years earlier, but the woman's kiss that signed off remained intact. From then on, he came across many letters. Alongside each one was the envelope with the destination that they had never reached. He did not know what to do. A lot of time had passed. No one was waiting for these letters now. Words from the gone and forgotten, sent to places and people no longer there. They were dead letters, and yet reading them felt to Avel like trespassing on something very much alive. He could not bring himself to return the words to the prison of the files, nor could he kill them by tearing up the pages. At the end of each night, Avel put the letters in their envelopes, stuck on fresh stamps, and dropped them in the mailbox. Clinical history. She said she suffered from tachycardia every time she saw him, even from a distance. She claimed that her salivary glands would go dry when he would look at her, even just a glance. She admitted to hypersecretion of the sweat glands each time he spoke to her, even just to return a greeting. She acknowledged wild swings in her blood pressure when he would brush against her, even by mistake. She confessed that because of him she suffered nausea, blurred vision, weak knees. During the day she could not stop from babbling stupidities, and at night she could not sleep. That was a long time ago, doctor, she said. I never felt it again. The physician raised her eyebrows. You never felt it ever again? He made his diagnosis. Your case is serious. The conjugal institution. Captain Camillo Teixeira always went about with God on his lips. Good day, God willing. Until tomorrow, God willing. When he took over the artillery base in Trinidad, he discovered that not a single soldier was married, as God commands, that all were living in sin, rolling in the hay of promiscuity like beasts in the field. To put an end to this scandalous offense to the Lord, he sent for the priest who said Mass in town. In a single day the priest ministered the holy sacrament of matrimony to all the troops, each with his girl, in the name of the captain, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. From that Sunday on, all the soldiers were husbands. On Monday, one soldier said, That woman is mine, and he buried a knife in the belly of a friend who had been looking at her. On Tuesday, another soldier said, This'll teach you, and he wrung the neck of the woman who had vowed to obey him. On Wednesday, brawls and squabbles. A derelict old man was selling contraband cigarettes from a little table in an alley in downtown Santiago, Chile. He was sitting on the ground, drinking from a bottle. I stopped to chat and accepted a sip of wine that promised instant cirrhosis. As I was paying him for the cigarettes, a melee began. All at once the flies scattered, the wine capsized, the table collapsed, and a steamroller of a woman picked up the old man with one fist. I bent to collect the cigarettes strewn on the ground, while the woman shook the bag of bones in her hand and screamed, You philandering cocksucker, you Don Juan asshole, who do you think you are, barefaced swine? So you've been screwing Eva and Lucy? And he muttered, I don't even know that one. And Pamela too. And he moaned, She came after me. But the bombardment continued. You've been fucking Martha, that bitch, and that whore, Tarito, and Betty, and Patty, to the complete indifference of passers-by, who showed no interest in this string of platinum blondes and fake eyelashes and reptilian boots. While the indignant woman had her culprit by the throat and up against the wall, the man was mumbling vows. You are my only love, you are my cathedral, the others are nothing but little mission halls, until she, squeezing with intent to strangle, tossed him aside. Get out of here, she ordered. Get going, I never want to see you again. If I ever do. Without another word, she pronounced her dreadful verdict, her eyes fixed on his sacred parts. She scissored the air with her fingers. Bravely, I edged away. The Seven Deadly Sins. Kneeling in the confessional, a repentant sinner admitted to greed, gluttony, lust, sloth, envy, pride, and anger. I've never confessed. I didn't want you priests enjoying my sins more than me, so out of greed I kept them to myself. Gluttony. From the moment I saw her, I confessed I wanted to eat her alive. Is it lust to enter someone and get lost inside and never find your way out? That woman was the only thing in the world that didn't make me slothful. I was envious of myself, I confess. And I confess that later on I admitted the sin of pride, believing she was me. And crazed with anger, I tried to break that mirror when I didn't see myself. Subsoil of the night. Because the woman never shut up, because she was always complaining, because there was never a small misunderstanding that she didn't turn into a major problem, because he was tired of working like a mule for her and all her relatives, because he had to plead like a beggar in bed, because she had another and she pretended to be a saint, because she was a gnawing ache like nothing else he had ever felt, because he could not live without her or with her, he had no choice but to wring her neck like a chicken's. Because the man never listened, because he never paid attention, because there was no major problem that he didn't treat like a small misunderstanding, because she was tired of working like a mule for him and all his relatives, because she had to obey him like a whore in bed, because he had another and told the whole world, because he was a gnawing ache like nothing else she had ever felt, because she could not live without him or with him, she had no choice but to push him from the 10th floor like a sack of potatoes. In the morning, they ate their breakfast. The radio was blaring the news like any other day. Nothing they heard caught their attention. Reporters don't cover dreams. Morals and good habits. They shut her up in a room, tied to the bed. Every day a man entered, always the same one. After a few months, the prisoner was pregnant. Then they forced her to marry him. The prison guards were not policemen or soldiers. They were the father and mother of the girl, practically a child, who had been caught kissing and stroking a classmate, another girl. In Zimbabwe at the end of 1994, Bev Clark heard her story. Fish. Mr. or Mrs., or both, or sometimes a he and sometimes a she. In the depths of the sea, you can never tell. Sea bass and other fish are virtuous in the art of non-surgical sex change. The girls become boys and the boys become girls with astonishing ease, with no condemnation or ridicule for betraying nature or God. Birds. The house, made of grass and twigs, is much larger than its inhabitant. Building it in the thorny brush takes only a couple of weeks. Adorning it, however, demands much more time and effort. No two houses are alike. Each home is painted to order, with pigment made from crushed berries, and each is decorated in its own way. The surroundings are dressed with treasures from the forest or from the detritus of some nearby town. Pebbles, flowers, snail shells, weeds, mosses are laid out to create harmony, and beer bottle caps and bits of colored glass, preferably blue, depict circles or fans on the ground. These designs are arranged and rearranged 1,000 times until they occupy the best spots for catching the light. Not for nothing are the birds called Bauer Birds. They are the most flamboyant architects in the islands of Oceania. When the bird finishes building his home and garden, he lingers. He sings and waits for the females to pass by, for one of them to pause in its flight and admire his work, and then to choose him. Woodcocks. Winter gives way and the frozen mist melts in the beechwood forests of Asturias, where witches and owls build their nests. That's when the woodcocks sing from their high perches. The cocks call to the hens and the hens respond. It's still dark when the song-soaked dance begins. Red faces, white beaks, black beards. The woodcocks and the wood hens sway like tiny carnival masks. Hunters crouch in the forest, trigger fingers at the ready. It's not easy to catch woodcocks, turned away as they are in their hiding places, safe from all danger. But the hunters know that the birds become blind and deaf for the duration of this fiesta, the mating dance. Spiders. Step by tiny step, thread by tiny thread, the male spider approaches the female. He offers her music, playing the web like a harp, and he dances for her while he caresses her bit by bit until her velvet body faints. Then, before embracing her with all 8 arms, the male wraps the female in his web and ties her up tight, otherwise she will devour him when the lovemaking is over. The male spider loves and leaves before the prisoner awakens and insists on breakfast with the bed. Who can fathom the fellow? He tied her to get astride her, escaped without dying inside her, and now he misses his darling spider. Serpents. Logs ablaze, sausages spitting juices, roast meat emitting the most sinful aromas. In front of his big stone house in the Sierra de Minas, deep in the forest, Don Varencio was throwing a barbecue for his friends from the city. They were about to tuck in when the youngest son, still a boy, announced, "There's a snake in the house." Raising a stick, he asked, "Shall I kill it?" He was given the go-ahead. A little later, Don Valencio went inside to check on the boy's work. It was a job well done. The head, now crushed by blows, still bore the mark of a yellow cross. It was a cross snake, and a big one, measuring 2 yards, maybe 3. Don Valencio congratulated his son, served the meat, and sat down. The barbecue went on at length with seconds and thirds and much wine. At the end, Don Valencio raised his glass to the matador, offering him the skin as a trophy, and he invited all to come and see. It was enormous, the bitch, but when they entered the house, the serpent was gone. Don Venancio gnashed his teeth and said there was nothing to be done. Her companion must have carried her off to the cave. "It's always that way," he said, "whether male or female. The widow or widower always comes for the dead." Then everyone went back to the table, to the wine, and to the chatter and the jokes. Everyone except Pino Ungerfeld, who told me this story. He could not. He remained in the house a long while, staring at the dry black stain on the floor. Afterlife. The sun is setting behind the cypresses when Aurora Maloney reaches the cemetery of San Antonio de Areco. They had phoned her. "We need the space. You understand, so many people dying." An employee says, "Good afternoon, Senora. That comes to 300 pesos. Here you are." And he hands her a plastic bag, the kind you use for putting out the garbage. An enormous car is waiting. The driver, dressed in black from cap to shoes, drives in silence. She appreciates the silence. On the other side of the window, the world flows by. In a field, some boys play soccer. Aurora can't bear their insufferable joy, and she turns away. She washes the back of the driver's neck. She does not look at the bag, which is riding on the floor. Who is inside the plastic bag? Is it Daniel? The boy who used to sell homemade cheese and custard with her in the streets of Montevideo? The one who swore he'd changed the world and ended up in the gutter on a road like this one with 36 bullets in his body? Why didn't anyone warn them that it would all be over so quickly? Where are the words they never got to say? What about the things they never got to do? The gunmen, the murderers in uniform, are still there, right where they were. But where is she? And this never-ending car ride, this rented funeral float, is she here? Is she this woman who bites her lip and feels her eyes stinging? Is this a car? Or is it a phantom train that one day jumped the tracks and carried her off to nowhere? Time plays tricks. Squatting on the bed, she gazed at him, her eyes sliding over his nakedness from head to toe, slowly, as if scrutinizing each freckle, and she said, "The only thing I'd change is your address." From then on, they lived together and enjoyed fighting over the paper at breakfast and cooking crazy concoctions and sleeping wrapped around each other. Suddenly, half of all that was gone. Now this mutilated man, this he without she, tries to recall her as she was, as any of the many women she was, each with her own grace and power, because she had the astonishing habit of being reborn. But no, memory refuses. He can't remember anything but an icy body empty of all the woman she was. Unibody. With the help of their white canes and a few drinks, they groped their way through the narrow streets of Tlaquepaque. It seemed they were about to fall, but no. Whenever she stumbled, he righted her. Whenever he swayed, she steadied him. They walked as a duo, and as a duo they sang. They always stopped at the same spot in the shade of the portico, and with strained voices they sang old Mexican tunes about love and war. They used some instrument, maybe a guitar, I can't recall, to compound the racket. And between songs they'd rattle the bowl in which they collected coins from their faithful public. Then they'd head off, preceded by their canes. They would push through the crowd and be lost in the distance, a ragged, battered pair, each huddled tightly against the other, together as one in their shared patch of darkness under the sun. The kiss. Antonio Bujia randomly picked out one of the blocks of Carrara marble he'd been buying over the years. It was a tombstone, from a grave that lay who knows where. He hadn't the slightest idea how it had ended up in his workshop. Antonio laid the tombstone down on a support base and set to work. He had a vague idea of what he wanted to carve, or maybe he had none. He began by erasing the inscription, the name of a man, the year of his birth, the year of his death. Then the chisel entered the stone. Inside, Antonio found a surprise waiting for him. The vein of the dark marble took the shape of two profiles meeting, eye to eye, something like two faces, joined at the forehead, nose, and mouth. The sculptor obeyed, carefully excavating until the encounter within the stone emerged. The next day he figured his work was done, and then, when he lifted the tombstone, he saw what he hadn't seen before. On the back of the stone was another inscription, the name of a woman, the year of her birth, the year of her death. The oldest man in the world. It was summer, and Don Francisco Barrios Nuevo had been there for countless summers past. "He's a glutton for years," said the woman next door, older than a tortoise. The neighbor was scaling a fish with a knife. Flies were rubbing their legs in anticipation of the feast, and Don Francisco was drinking guava juice. Gustavo Tatis, who had come from far away, shouted questions into his ear. The world was still, the air was still. In the town of Mahagua, a hamlet lost in the swamps, everyone else was taking a siesta. Gustavo asked Don Francisco about his first love. He had to repeat the question several times. First love, first love, first love. Methuselah cupped his ear with his hand. What? What did you say? And at last, oh, yes. Rocking in his chair, he wrinkled his brow, closed his eyes. My first love. Gustavo waited. He waited while memory traveled, and that creaky little boat listed, shipped water, got lost. It took a voyage of more than a century, and the waters were shrouded in mist. Don Francisco went in search of his first time, his face screwed up, pitted by 1,000 furrows. Gustavo looked away and waited. At last, Don Francisco murmured, almost secretly, Isabel. Then he rammed his bamboo cane into the ground, and leaning on it, he rose up from his chair, arched his back like a rooster, and howled, Isabel! Time turns pages. When? She asked. When? Once a week, Miguel Miglonico passed by her doorway. He always found her sitting there, facing the street, and Doña Avrida always peppered him with questions about his wife's pregnancy. When? And Miguel repeated, June. White attire always neat, white hair always combed. Doña Avrida radiated peace, the dignity of age, and she dispensed advice. Touch her belly, it brings good luck. Tell her to drink dark beer or melt heads, so she'll have lots of milk. Give her what she hankers for, each and every craving, because if a woman has to swallow her hunger, the kid gets birthmarks. Every Friday, Doña Avrida awaited Miguel's appearance. Her translucent skin, which encircled her body like pink smoke, revealed a tangle of little veins popping with curiosity. And her belly, is it pointed? Then for sure it's a boy. Winds from the south blew cold. Autumn was leaving the streets of Montevideo. It won't be long now, right? One afternoon, Miguel came by in a great hurry. The doctor says it's a matter of hours, today or tomorrow. Doña Avrida opened her eyes wide. Already? The following Friday, her chair was empty. Doña Avrida died on June 17th, 1980, while in the Miglonico home, a boy named Martin was born. Mother. A sneaker, a love letter, signature illegible. 10 little pots with plastic flowers. 7 balloons in assorted colors. An eyeliner pencil, a glove, a cap, an old photo of Alan Ladd, 3 Ninja Turtles, a storybook, a maraca, 14 hairbrushes, and a few toy cars are part of the booty of a cat that lives and steals in the Avellaneda neighborhood. Slinking along rooftops and cornices, she steals for her son, who is paralyzed and lives surrounded by these ill-gotten offerings. Father. Vera stayed home from school and spent the entire day indoors. At dusk, she wrote her father a letter. He was in the hospital, quite ill. She wrote, You must like yourself, take care of yourself, look out for yourself, spoil yourself, forgive yourself, love yourself, cherish yourself. I'll like you, I'll take care of you, I'll look out for you, I'll spoil you, I'll forgive you, I'll love you, I'll cherish you. Hector Carnavale lasted a few days more. Then, with his daughter's letter under his pillow, he departed in his sleep. When Miriam Miguez looks at a mountain, she wishes she could pass through it with her gaze and come out on the other side of the world. When she looks at her childhood, she wishes she could pass through all the years and come out on the other side of time. On the other side of time is grandmother. In her house in Cordoba, grandmother kept a few boxes hidden away. Sometimes Miriam and she were alone, and there was no danger that anyone might walk in. Grandmother would crack open her treasure chests and let her grandchild see inside. Those sequins, tiny medals, bird feathers, old keys, knitting needles, colored ribbons, dry leaves, and magazine clippings looked like mere things, but the two of them knew that they were much more than things. When grandmother died, it all disappeared, perhaps burned or put out with the trash. Now Miriam has secret boxes of her own. Sometimes she opens them. Grandfather. Geologists were searching for the remains of a small copper mine called Cortadera, which had once existed but no longer appeared on any map. In the town of Cerrillos, someone told them, "No one knows anything about that. Who could say? Maybe old Honorio knows?" Don Honorio, defeated by aches and pains and wine, greeted the geologist from his cot. They had a hard time convincing him, only after a goodly number of bottles and many cigarettes. I think so, I don't know. We'll see. Did the old man agree to accompany them for the following day. Dog-tired, stumbling, he began to walk. At first he languished at the back. He refused any assistance, and they had to wait for him to catch up. With a great effort he managed to reach the dry riverbed. Then, bit by bit, his gait grew steadier. Along the length of the gully and across the stony fields, his bent body began to straighten. Over there, he pointed the way, and his voice came alive when he recognized long-lost places. After a full day's hike, Don Honorio, who had started in silence, was doing most of the talking. He climbed hills and leaped over ears. By the time they entered the valley, he was marching ahead of his young, exhausted companions. He slept with his face to the stars. He was the first one up, anxious to get to the mine, and he brooked no detour or distraction. "That's the grinder, and there's the steam shovel," he said, and without the least hesitation, he located the mouths of the shafts in the places that once boasted the best veins, the rusty irons that used to be machinery, the ruins that were homes, the parched corners once fed by springs. For each spot, each object, Don Honorio had a story, and every story overflowed with people and laughter. By the time they arrived back in the town, he was younger than his grandchildren. Birth. The public hospital in the fanciest neighborhood of Rio de Janeiro received 1,000 patients every day. Nearly all were poor or poorer. A doctor on call told Juan Doyen, "Last week I had to choose between two newborns. We have only one incubator. The babies came at the same time, each with 1 foot in the grave, and I had to choose which would live and which would die. This isn't up to me," the doctor thought. "Let God decide." But God paid no heed. Whatever he did, he was going to commit a crime. If he did nothing, he'd commit two. No time to dither. The newborns were slipping away. The doctor closed his eyes. One baby was condemned to die. The other was condemned to live. Baptism. A ferocious storm was pelting Buenos Aires. The father yanked the baby from his mother's arms, carried him to the roof, and raised him high and naked in the freezing rain. Amid flashes of lightning, he cried out, "My son, may the waters of heaven bless you!" No one knows just how, but the newborn managed to keep from dying of pneumonia. He also escaped the name Sunday Rest. His father, a poor anarchist and poet, eternally pursued by creditors and the police, had chosen the name in homage to the workers' latest victory, but the civil registry refused. So he got together with his friends, also poor anarchists and poets eternally pursued by creditors and the police, to discuss the matter. They decided the boy would lead a literary life and that he deserved the name Catulo, after the Roman poet Catullus. At the civil registry, they added an accent to Catulo Castillo, who went on to write La Ultima Curda and other tangos of the sort people listen to standing up, hat in hand. Christening. The town of Stubby Hill never had a hill, stubby or otherwise, but Javier Ceballos remembers from his childhood that it had 3 constables, 3 judges, and 3 doctors. One of the doctors, who lived downtown, was the needle on the compass. Javier's mother would give her son directions. "From Dr. Galarza's house, go down 2 blocks," or That's up the street from Dr. Galarza's. Or, go down to the drugstore around the corner from Dr. Galarza. And off Javier would march. Whenever he went, under sun or moon, Galarza was always seated on the porch, yerba mate gourd in hand, responding politely to his neighbor's greetings. Good morning, doctor. Good afternoon, doctor. Good evening, doctor. Javier was a grown man when it occurred to him to ask why Dr. Galarza had no office or clinic. That's when he found out. The man was no doctor. He was doctor. Given name, doctor. Family name, Galarza. His father yearned for his son with a diploma and didn't think the baby could be trusted. Leo. For Riccardo Marcini, the moment of truth had arrived. Come on, Leo, he said. We have to talk. And off they went up the street, the two of them. They wandered for a while around Saavedra, turning corners in silence. As usual, Leonardo fell behind, then had to hurry to catch up to Riccardo, who walked with his hands in his pockets and his brow furrowed. At the plaza, Riccardo sat down. He swallowed. He took Leonardo's face in his hands, looked into his eyes, and let loose a torrent. Look, Leo, forgive me for telling you, but you're not moms and dads, and, Leo, better you should know the facts. You got picked up off the street. He took a deep breath. I had to tell you, Leo. Leonardo had been plucked out of a garbage can as a newborn, but Riccardo spared him that detail. Then they went back home. Riccardo was whistling. Leonardo stopped at the foot of his favorite trees, greeted the neighbors by wagging his tail, and barked at the fleeting shadow of a cat. The neighborhood loved him because he was brown and white, same as the Platense, the local soccer team that almost never won. Lord Chichester. In one of the many parking lots of Buenos Aires, Raquel heard him cry. Someone had tossed him between two cars. He joined the household, was named Lord Chichester. He'd been born not long ago, and his fur was dull and his head was big. He ended up one-eyed later on, after he grew up and fought a duel over the she-cat, Milonga. One night, wild screeching tore Raquel and Juan Amaro from the deepest of slumbers. It sounded like Lord Chichester was being skinned alive. Strange, since though ugly, he was usually quiet. Something hurts bad, said Juan. They followed the yowls to the end of the corridor. Raquel listened closely. He's letting us know there's a leak. They wondered about the big old house until they found the glop glop of a drip in the bathroom. That pipe always drips, said Juan. It's going to flood, Raquel feared. And they discussed it. Yes, no, who knows? Until Juan looked at his watch, nearly 5 in the morning, and, yawning, he begged, let's go back to sleep. And, he concluded, Lord Chichester is nuts. They were about to enter the bedroom, still persecuted by the cat screeching, when the old cracked ceiling above their bed collapsed. Prez. When Mariana Mactus turned 6, a neighbor on Calea de la Costa gave her a little blue chick. Not only did the chick have blue feathers, which gave off violet sparks in the sunlight, but also peep blue pea and peep blue peeps. A miracle of nature, helped along perhaps by an injection of blue dye in the egg. Mariana baptized it Perez. They were friends. They spent hours chatting on the terrace while Perez walked about pecking at breadcrumbs. The chick didn't last long, and when that brief blue life came to an end, Mariana lay sprawled on the floor as if she would never get up again. Staring at a tile, she intoned, Poor world without Perez. Curious people. Soledad, 5, daughter of Juanita Hernandez. Why don't dogs eat dessert? Vera, 6, daughter of Elsa Viagra. Where does Night sleep? Does Night sleep here under the bed? Luis, 7, son of Francisca Bermudez. Will God be angry if I don't believe in him? I don't know how to tell him. Marcos, 9, son of Sylvia Awad. If God made himself, how did he make his back? Carlitos, 40, son of Maria Scaglione. Mama, how old was I when you weaned me? My psychiatrist wants to know. The rate of infant immortality. When Manuel was a year and a half, he wanted to know why he couldn't hold water in his hand. When he was 5, he wanted to know why people die. What is dying? My grandma died because she was old, so why did a kid younger than me die? I saw it yesterday on TV. Sick people die, so why do people who aren't sick die? Do dead people die for a while, or do they die for good? At least Manuel had an answer for the question that most troubled him. My brother Felipe is never going to die because he always wants to play. Useful lessons. Joaquin de Souza is learning to read, and he practices with the signs he sees. He thinks the most important word in the world is no, because everything begins with it. No trespassing, no dogs allowed, no littering, no smoking, no spitting, no parking, no loitering, no campfires, no noise, no. Rules. Kama was playing with a ball. The ball was playing with Kama. The ball was a world of colors, and the world was flying free and wild, floating on air, bouncing wherever it wished. It touched down here, leaped over there, bounced and bounced until it reached his mother and came to a halt. Maya Lopez took the ball and locked it away. She said Kama was a menace to the furniture, to the house, to the neighborhood, and to all of Mexico City, and she made him put on his shoes, sit down properly, and do his homework. Rules are rules, she said. Kama raised his head. I have my rules too, and in his opinion, a good mother should obey her son's rules. Let me play all I want. Let me go barefoot. Don't ever make me go to school. Don't make me go to bed early. And we'll move to a new house every day. Then, eyes on the ceiling and in a tone of feigned indifference, he added, and be my girlfriend. Good health. At the bus stop, a swarm of youngsters crowded on board, loaded down with books and notebooks and other stuff. They filled the bus with non-stop chatter and laughter. Talking all at once, shouting, pushing, showing off, they laughed at anything and everything. A man scolded Andres Bralich, one of the loudest. What's wrong with you, kid? You got laughing sickness? Just one glance was enough to confirm that all the other passengers had been treated in time and were in full remission. The teacher. The sixth graders at school in Montevideo held a novel writing competition. Everyone took part. 3 of us were on the jury. Oscar, teacher of the threadbare cuffs and a fakir's wages, a student representing the authors, and me. At the awards ceremony, no parents or other adults were allowed in. We, the members of the jury, read out our decision, which praised the merits of each and every submission. Everyone won, and for every winner there was an ovation, a downpour of streamers, and a little medal donated by a local jeweler. Afterward, Oscar told me, we feel so connected to each other. I like to keep them all back. One of the girls who had moved here from a small town in the country stayed to chat. She told me she never used to open her mouth, and with a laugh she said now the problem was she couldn't shut up. She loved her teacher, she said. She loved him very, very much because he taught her not to be afraid of being wrong. The students. When the teacher asks the girls what they want to be when they grow up, they don't answer. Then quietly they confess, I want to be wider, sing on TV, sleep until noon, marry a guy who won't beat me, marry a guy with a car, go far away where nobody will ever find me. The boys say, I want to be wider, be a soccer star, be Spider-Man and walk up walls, rob a bank and never have to work, buy a restaurant and get to eat all the time, go far away where nobody will ever find me. They live quite close to the city of Tucumán, but they've never seen it. Arriving by foot or on horseback, they attend school one day, then skip the next two, taking turns with their siblings to wear the only pair of shoes. And the question they most often ask the teacher is, when is lunch coming? Condors. By mule, motorcycle, or on his own 2 feet, Federico Carranza roams the mountains of Salta. He heals mouths in those desolate, destitute places. A visit from the dentist, pain's nemesis, is good news, and up there good news is as scarce as everything else. Federico plays soccer with the children who rarely see the inside of a school. They learned what they know by herding goats and chasing a rag ball in their world amid the clouds. Between goals, they have fun teasing the condors. Lying flat on the rocky ground, arms spread-eagled, they pretend to be dead. Then, when the condors attack, the little corpses jump up and run away. Manpower. Mohammed Ashraf doesn't go to school. From sun up till moonrise, he measures, cuts, shapes, punctures, and sews soccer balls, which then go rolling out from the Pakistani village of Omar Khat toward the stadiums of the world. Mohammed is 11. He has been at this since he was 5. If he knew how to read and could read English, he would understand the label he sticks on each of his products. This ball was not made by children. Recompense. Homeless and aimless, with neither a where nor a why, Jose Antonio Gutierrez grew up on the streets of Guatemala City. To dodge hunger, he stole. To dodge loneliness, he sniffed glue and imagined himself a Hollywood star. One day, he took off north, headed for paradise, dodging the police, sneaking on train after train, hiking 1,001 nights. He found his way to California, and there he stayed. 6 years later, in Guatemala's most wretched barrio, a loud knocking woke Ingracia Gutierrez. Several men in uniform stood at the door. They'd come to tell her that her brother, Jose Antonio, of the U.S. Marines, had died in Iraq. The kid from the streets was the first casualty of the invading forces in the year 2003. The authorities wrapped his coffin in the stars and stripes and gave him military honors, and they made him a U.S. citizen, which was the reward they promised. During the live funeral broadcast, they praised the heroism of the valiant soldier fallen in combat against Iraqi troops. Later, it came out that he was killed by friendly fire, which is what they call the bullets that get the wrong enemy. The horse. Every afternoon, Paulo Freire snuck into the movie theater in Recife Casa Forte neighborhood to see Tom Mix. He watched, eyes wide and unblinking, day after day. The feats of the cowboy in the broad-brimmed hat who rescued damsels in distress were entertaining enough. But what Paulo really liked was the way his horse sailed along. From so much time spent peering at the horse and revering him, the two became friends, and Tom Mix's horse stayed with Paulo for the rest of his life. Paulo traveled a great deal. His work as a revolutionary educator, a man who taught by learning, took him around the world, down all the roads and throughout all the years of wars and adversity. That horse, the color of light, galloped tirelessly on in his memory and his dreams. Paulo searched everywhere for those movies from his childhood. Tom who? No one had a clue. Then at last, at the age of 74, he found them somewhere in New York, and he watched them once again. It was unbelievable. His faithful friend, the shimmering horse, was nothing at all like Tom Mix's, not even close. Faced with this painful revelation, Paulo murmured, "It doesn't matter," but it does. The final prank. The children of Brazil learned to be Brazilians and magicians from hearing or reading the stories of Monteiro Lobato. When he died, they all became orphans. But the children of Brazil did not attend the funeral. Two adults offered eulogies, and each claimed Monteiro Lobato for his own political party. Rossini, Camargo, Guarnieri bid farewell to his communist comrade. And Phoebus Gicovate paid homage to his fellow Trotskyite. As soon as the funeral speeches ended, the two squared off. They argued in the plural, as befits questions of world revolution. Renegades, divisionists, bureaucrats, provocateurs, usurpers, traitors, murderers. Back and forth the charges flew, the heat of ideological debate rising until the men came to blows, punching wildly. The two tumbled right into the open grave. Donna Perezinha, the widow, threw up her arms and implored them to show some respect for the dead. She didn't realize that Monteiro Lobato was dying all over again, this time from laughter. He was the one directing the brawl. On the waterfront. He seemed like a really nice kid, though they'd only just met. The boy who sold crabs on the beach invited Caetano for a ride in his boat. "I'd like to," Caetano said, "but I can't. I've got a lot to do. Errands." But they went. By boat they went to the market and the bank, the post office, and other places. All along the waterfront they entered the city from the shore. And to prolong the simple pleasure of looking at it, they took their time floating on the calm sea. Thus was San Salvador de Bahia discovered anew. Suffering the relentless racket of the city by foot was one thing. The city by boat was truly something else. Caetano Veloso had never seen it like that, from the wet, from the quiet. At the end of the afternoon, the boat dropped Caetano off back at the beach where he'd embarked. He wanted to know the name of the boy who'd revealed this other city that the city was. Standing in his boat, his black body gleamed in the sun's last rays. The boy said, "My name is Marco Polo. Marco Polo Mendez Pereira." Water. At the beginning of time, the ant's waist was not narrow. It's all in Genesis, in the version that circulates by word of mouth on Colombia's Pacific coast. The ant was round and filled with water, but God had forgotten to water the world. Realizing his blunder, he asked for help. The ant refused. Then God's fingers pinched his belly. Thus were born all the rivers in the seven seas. Waterlords. There are companies just like the ant, only they're much larger. At the end of the 20th century, a water war broke out in the city of Cochabamba. The U.S. company Bechtel took over the water system and tripled the rates overnight. Indigenous communities marched in from the valleys and blockaded the city, which also rebelled, raising barricades and burning water bills in a great bonfire in the Plaza de Armas. The Bolivian government answered with bullets, as usual. There was a state of siege, people were killed and imprisoned, but the uprising continued day after day, night after night, for 2 months unstoppable, until with a final push the people of Cochabamba won back the liquid that nourishes their bodies and sustains their crops. In the city of La Paz, however, protests failed to stop the French company Suez from taking over the water system. Rates skyrocketed and practically no one could afford to turn on the tap. Why was consumption so low? European experts and government officials wondered. Cultural backwardness, obviously. Poor people, which means just about everybody in Bolivia, don't know enough to bathe every day the way people have in Europe for maybe the last quarter of an hour, and they don't realize they need to wash the cars they don't have. Brands. With a wave of the hand, the customer declined the glass of tap water and summoned the sommelier, who read out a long list of bottled waters. The table tried a few brands not well known in California at about $7 a bottle. While they ate, they went through several bottles. Amazonas from the Brazilian jungle was very good, and the Spanish water from the Pyrenees was excellent, but best of all was the French brand Eau de Robinet. The robinet is where they all came from, the faucet. The bottles, with labels made up by a friendly printer, had been filled in the kitchen. The meal was filmed by a hidden camera in a chic Los Angeles restaurant, and Penn and Teller showed it on TV. The fountain. In the 12th century, when water was free like the air and unlabeled, the Pope and a fly met up at a fountain. Pope Adrian IV, the only English pontiff in the history of the Vatican, lived a hectic life due to incessant wars against William the Bad and Frederick Redbeard. Of the fly's life, nothing is known worth mentioning. By divine intervention or destiny's design, their paths crossed at the fountain in the plaza of the town of Agnani one summer noon in the year 1159. The Holy Father, who was thirsty, opened his mouth to drink, and the fly went down his throat. It was a mistake, for there was nothing of interest down there. But once inside, neither the fly's wings nor the Pope's fingers could get him out. In the struggle, both of them met their fate. The choking Pope died of a fly. The imprisoned fly died of a Pope. The lake. Holden Caulfield's history teacher was berating him for his shortcomings. To escape this distressing catalog, Holden thought about the ducks in New York Central Park. Where did they go in the winter when the lake iced over? A much more interesting topic than Egyptians and their mummies. J.D. Salinger told this story in his famous novel. 40 years later, Adolfo Gilly was walking beside the lake in Central Park. There was no ice. It was an autumn day around noon, and a teacher was reading that very passage aloud. His students were seated in a circle, listening. Then a flock of ducks came swimming over. The ducks stayed there, hugging the shore, while the teacher carried on reading about them. Afterward, the teacher departed, followed by his students, as did the ducks. The river. 3 centuries ago, the river shook off the French. Later, the English couldn't catch it either. It refused to stay put. Whenever an explorer mapped its course, the river would decamp that very night and flow elsewhere. In 1830, the river was caught. The city of Chicago was nailed to its banks to keep it from ever fleeing again. Then, at the end of the 19th century, the city tamed it with walls of cement, forcing the water to flow backward. One morning in the spring of 1992, after the river had behaved itself for a very long time, the city woke up to wet feet. A nasty surprise. The subway dripped, and basements did too, having the walls first in drops. Having slipped its leash, the river was not to be stopped. It seeped through the walls first in drops, then spurts, then in a surging flood that drowned the streets. After several days of rebellion, the renegade was subdued. To this day, the city sleeps with one eye open. Voices. Pedro Saad walked on the frozen waters of the Volga River. He was in the heart of Russia on a very cold winter afternoon. He was alone, but he had company as he walked. He could feel through the thick soles of his boots the lively vibration of the river beneath the ice. The flood. The streets were floral arrangements, the churches bonbon delights, the palaces gifts in a toy shop. But beautiful Antigua, capital of Guatemala, lived with its heart in its mouth. The angry, quaking earth condemned the city to perpetual anguish. What it didn't squander on tears, it spent on sighs. In 1773, the land bucked like never before. The river leaped its banks, washing away people and houses. The flood survivors had to flee and found another city far away. The river that flooded was, and is, called Penativo, pensive. Snails. For assistance, we turn to gods, devils, and the stars in the sky. We don't consult snails. But thanks to snails, the Shipibo Indians avoid drowning whenever the Ucayali River wakes up in a bad mood and rolls its white-capped waters inland over everything in its path. Snails give warning. Before each calamity, they lay their eggs on tree trunks above the line where the water will crest, and they never get it wrong. The Deluge. Weary of so much disobedience and sin, God decided to wipe from the face of the earth the flesh he had created with his own hand. Humans and beasts and serpents and even the birds in the sky were to be obliterated. When the sage Johannes Stoffler announced the exact date of the second great flood, the 4th of February, 1524, Count von Egelheim simply shrugged. Then God himself came to him in his dreams, beard of lightning, voice of thunder, and declared, "You will drown." Count von Egelheim, who knew the entire Bible by heart, leaped from his bed and called together the best carpenters in the region. Before you could say Amen, an enormous ark, 3 stories tall, made of resinous wood and caulked inside and out, was floating on the Rhine. The Count went on board with his family and all his servants and abundant supplies. He took along a male and a female of every species of all the beasts of the land and the air, and he waited. On the chosen day it rained, not much, more like a drizzle, but the first drops were enough to spark panic, and a crazed mass of people rushed the pier and swarmed over the ark. The Count tried to fight them off, and was thrown into the river, where he drowned. Shrimp. At the hour when the day bids adieu, fishermen on the Gulf of California prepare their nets. When that old magician, the sun, casts its final glow, their canoes slide between the little islands that line the coast. There they await the moon. Shrimp spend their day hidden in the depths, hugging the mud or the sand, As soon as the moon comes out, the shrimp rise. Moonlight calls to them, and they answer. Then the fishermen take the nets folded on their shoulders and toss them. The nets open as they fall, broad wings in the air, and capture their prey. Seeking the moon, the shrimp meet their doom. From the looks of them, no one would imagine that these whiskery creatures harbored such a poetic bent, but from the taste of them, any human would swear to it. The sea. Raphael Alberti has been in the world for almost a century, yet today he contemplates the Bay of Cadiz as if for the first time. Lying in the sun, he follows the unhurried paths of seagulls and sailboats, the azure breeze, the ebb and flow of foam on the water and in the air. He turns to Marcos Anna, who sits silently at his side, and giving his friend's arm a squeeze, he says, as if he has just found out, life is so short. Another punishment. Not only through banishment do coastal people lose their seas. At the end of 2002, an oil tanker split in half and spewed its poison over Galicia and beyond. Day after day, a lethal sticky tide laid siege to the waters and the coast. The blackened shoreline was a graveyard. Dead fish and dead birds floated in the putrid rot on the waters. The authorities, blind. The government, deaf. But the local fishermen, boats anchored, nets stowed, were not alone. Thousands upon thousands of volunteers stood with them to battle the enemy invasion, armed with shovels and buckets and whatever they could find. Day after day, week after week, they painstakingly stripped the sand and stones of their oily mourning garments. Those many hands made no speeches, but they were not mute. By doing, they said, never again. Downpour. The sky parted and dumped its water, raining as if it intended to pour out every last drop, extending from one horizon to the other, and all that rain fell into the sea. Over the white caps came a battleship. On deck, lying flat on his back, hands behind his head, a young soldier was letting himself be drenched, and asking himself questions. Though he was in the service, science was his thing. He'd never seen the rain at sea, and he was trying to find an explanation for such a ridiculous phenomenon. As a good scientist, the soldier believed, or wanted to believe, that although nature might act crazy and pretend to dementia, it always knows what it's doing. Isaac Asimov spent hours and hours lying there, getting pelted with bullets from the sky, and he found no answer. Why would nature pour water into the waterlogged sea when so many thirsty places on earth are begging the clouds for a little relief? Drought. Lamin Sina and his brothers had stopped playing. Since the beginning of the drought, they had done nothing but vainly scratch at the ground bombarded by the sun. Their mother stripped her ears and neck, sold her jewelry, and then her clothes, and then the housewares. Every day at the center of the barren house, she lit a fire under the scrap swimming in the bottom of the pot. They ate the last few kernels. Their mother continued lighting the fire so that the neighbors would see the smoke. A long siege, hemmed in by drought. Lamin and his brothers spent their nights with their eyes open and their days yawning and shivering as if it were cold. Sitting around the fire, skinny arms around their knees, they no longer even begged the sky for rain. Then their mother left and returned without the silver spoon she had always kept hidden under the floorboards. The little spoon, her secret treasure, her only inheritance, had belonged to the grandparents of her grandparents long before her country, Gambia, was a country. That final sale provided them with a morsel. but the life went out of her, Lemon says. Their mother never got up again. The fire at the center of the house went out. The peasant. Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli, born and raised on a tiny plot of land, shed no tears of nostalgia when he recalled his childhood there. Men, he said, have three ways of ruining their lives: women, gambling, and farming. Of the three, my father chose the most boring. But every day he climbed the Tower of Wind, the Vatican's highest spire, and settled down to look. Spyglass in hand, he quickly scanned the streets, then searched for the 7 hills on the outskirts of Rome, where the land was still land. He'd spent hours contemplating the distant greenery, until duty obliged him to end his communion. Then Angelo would put on his white cassock, and with his pen in his pocket and his cross on his chest, the only things he owned in this world, he returned to the throne where once again he'd become Pope John XIII. In 1992, while people were celebrating 5 centuries of something billed as the salvation of the Americas, a Catholic priest arrived at a community hidden in the ravines of the Mexican southeast. Before saying Mass, he heard confession. In the Toholobal language, the Indians told their sins. Carlos Lenkersdorf translated as best he could, one confession after another, but he soon realized that no one could make sense of such mysteries. He says he abandoned his corn. Carlos translated. He says the cornfield is very sad, many days since he last went. He says he abused the fire, he cursed the flames because they didn't glow brightly. He says he defiled the path, cutting back undergrowth when there was no need. He says he hurt the ox. He says he chopped down a tree without telling it why. The priest had no idea what to do with these sins that don't appear anywhere on Moses' list. The offering. It was Enrique Castanare's birthday, and there was a party. Nobody had invited Manuela Godoy, but the guitarist called out to her. She wasn't the sort to join in. She had lived and drunk away no one knew how many years, but with no one, for no one, always keeping to her shack on the outskirts of the town of Robles. People knew only that she was so poor she had nothing, not even fleas, and so lonely she slept with her arms around a bottle. But the night of the party, Manuela hung about the Castanares' house, peering in the windows until they asked her in and she joined the dancing throng. She wore everyone out, dancing to every song and drinking all the wine. She was the last to leave. They wrapped up what was left of the barbecue and a few empanadas, and with them bundled into a sack, she headed off at the end of the night. Weaving from side to side, she entered the cornfield and vanished. The following morning, when Enrique looked out the door, she was standing there, waiting. "What did you forget, Doña Manuela?" She shook her head. In her hands, as if in a chalice, glowed a squash. It was the first harvest from her garden. "For you," she said. Beer. The elixir leads to ruin, to the ruin of slugs. At nightfall, they emerge from their hiding places at a slug's pace, march off to dine on the green flesh of plants. In the middle of the garden, a glass of beer keeps watch. The temptation is irresistible. Drawn by the aroma, the slugs climb the side of the glass. From the edge of the abyss, they contemplate the tasty foam, and then, foregoing all caution, down they slide. In the sea of beer, drunk and happy, they drown. Carnal sin. He made the count as usual. His men didn't know how it had happened, or they were lying. He counted again, made sure. A calf is missing. He caught the hired hand he suspected, secured him with rope, mounted his horse, and dragged him off. The man was more dead than alive, his flesh torn by the rocky ground, but Don Carmen Itrago still took his time and pinned him with great care. He drove in stakes one after the other, and with moist rawhide he tied down the condemned man's hands, feet, waist, and neck. What remained of the man cried out, "I'll pay for the calf, Don Carmen. I'll give you whatever you say. I'll give you my life." At last, an offer I can't refuse, the boss said from high up on his horse, and he trotted off through the dust. There were no witnesses, except for the horse, who by now is dead. Of the hired hand, eaten by the ants in the sun, not even his name is left, only his bones, arms spread like a crucifix on the red earth, and Don Carmen wasn't the sort of man to talk about such things, because private property is part of life, and that's nobody's business. Nevertheless, Alfredo Armas Alfonso told the story. He was there without being there, and he saw without seeing, the way he has seen everything that has happened since the world became the world in this wide valley split by the Unari River. Diet. Sarah Tarler Burkholz was very short. She didn't have to sit down for her grandchildren to comb her hair, which fell in tight curls from her pretty face to her belly button. Sarah was so fat that she couldn't breathe. In a Chicago hospital, the doctor told her the obvious. To bring her height and weight back to proportion, she had to follow a strict diet, avoiding all fat. She had a voice of silk. Her brashest statements sounded like intimate confessions, as if sharing a secret. She fixed her eyes on the doctor and said, "I'm not sure life is worth living without salami." The following year, embracing her undoing, she died. Her heart failed. To science, the cause was no mystery, but we'll never really know whether her heart tired of eating salami or of giving. Alfredo Mires Ortiz wanted to compile a list of the customs and seasons of Cajamarca. The local people suggested a few categories: eclipse, rain, flood, mist, frost, gust, whirlwind. Alfredo agreed. "Oh yes," he said, "natural phenomena." With time, Alfredo learned. The eclipse happens, he learned, because the sun and the moon can't get along. Sun of fire, moon of water. The couple is so quarrelsome that when they meet up, the sun either burns the moon or the moon douses the sun. The rain, he learned, is a sister of the rivers, that the earth's blood runs through the rivers, and that flooding results when blood is spilled, that the mist has a fine time playing tricks on people out walking, that frost is one-eyed, which is why it burns the crops only on one side. that the gust licks its lips, eating seeds planted under a new moon, and that the whirlwind spins because it has only one foot. Soul in plain sight. According to an ancient belief, the tree of life grows upside down. Its leaves burrow into the earth, its roots gaze at the sky. It offers not its fruits, but its origins. Rather than hiding underground what is most intimate, most vulnerable, it bears its roots, exposing them to the winds of the world. That's life, says the tree of life. The ginkgo. It is the oldest of all trees, around since the dinosaurs. They say its leaves prevent asthma, cure headaches, and relieve the discomforts of old age. They also say that ginkgo is the best remedy for poor memory. This claim has been proven. When the atom bomb turned the city of Hiroshima into a blackened wasteland, an old ginkgo was leveled near the epicenter of the explosion. The tree was burned to cinders, just like the Buddhist temple it protected. 3 years later, someone found a little green shoot peeking out from the charcoal. The dead stump had sprouted. The tree revived, opened its arms, flowered. The survivor of the massacre is still there, so people will know. The tree remembers. 7 women sat in a circle, from far away, from the town of Momostenango. Humberto Acabal brought them a few dry leaves he collected at the foot of a Spanish cedar. Each woman crushed a leaf, quietly, next to her ear, and each opened a window on the tree's memory. One felt the wind blowing, another the branch swaying softly, a third the beating of a bird's wings, yet another heard rain falling, one the scurrying of a beetle, another the echo of voices, the last the low murmur of footsteps. The flower remembers. It looks like an orchid, but it's not. It smells like a gardenia, but it's not that either. Its large petals tremble like white wings yearning to fly away and leave the stalk behind. That must be why in Cuba they call it mariposa, butterfly. Alessandra Riccio planted a butterfly bulb she brought from Havana to Naples. In the strange earth of a far-off land, the butterfly came into leaf but did not flower. Months and years went by, and it sprouted nothing but greenery, until a few of Alessandra's Cuban friends came to visit and spent a week at her house. The plant was surrounded by the lilting sounds of home, that melodious Caribbean way of singing the words they speak. For 7 days and 7 nights, the plant listened to the music of conversation, since Cubans talk whenever they're awake and also in their sleep. After bidding her friends goodbye at the airport, Alessandra returned home to find white petals of a newborn flower. Green dialogue. They look stationary, but they breathe and move, seeking the light. And they talk. Few people know this, but when a tree gets cut or bruised, it protects itself by secreting poison, and it sends out an alarm to other trees. Words travel through the air that in tree language say, danger and watch out. Then the other trees protect themselves by secreting poison too. Maybe that's how it's been since trees first stood tall and multiplied, when the forests were so vast that it said a squirrel could circle the earth hopping from branch to branch. Now, between one desert and the next, the surviving trees keep alive their ancient custom of taking care of each other. Mute. Many are the rings inscribed on their trunks. These giant trees, heavy with years, have spent centuries chained to the depths of the earth, and they cannot escape. Defenseless against chainsaws, they crack and fall. Whenever one topples, a world comes crashing down, and flocks of birds are left homeless. Unwieldy old trees are fated to die. In their place grow profitable young saplings. Native forests give way to contrived forests. Order, military, industrial triumphs over the chaos of nature. Pine and eucalyptus grown for export look like soldiers in formation, marching off to the world market. Fast food, fast wood. Man-made forests grow overnight and are sold in the time it takes to say Amen. Source of hard currency, triumph of development, symbol of progress. These wood farms suck the land dry and leave the soil barren. No birds sing in them. People call them forests of silence. Alone. The macaw was but a chick in a nest when his tree was felled. Imprisoned in a bird cage, he spent his whole life indoors. When his owner died, he was abandoned. The Schlenkers, who run a refuge for lost animals near Quito, took him in. The macaw had never laid eyes on a relative. Now he can't get along with other macaws or with any of his parrot cousins. He can't even get along with himself. Hunched in a corner, he shakes and screeches, pecks and pulls out his feathers until his plucked skin bleeds. Poor thing, I say. Nothing could be lonelier. But then Abdon Ubidia, who brought me to the refuge, introduces me to the loneliest creature in the world. It is the last Agutipaka, or wild guinea pig. He spends his nights walking in circles and his days hidden in the hollow trunk of a fallen tree. In this region, he is the only one of his species left alive. All of his kind have been exterminated. While he awaits death, he has not a soul to talk to. Houdini. His captors cut off one wing when they took him in the jungle. Kitty Hischier found him in the Puerto Vallarta market. She felt sorry for him and bought him thinking she'd set him free. But the parrot couldn't manage on his own. In his mutilated state, he'd have been an easy snack for the first hungry gullet to come along. Kitty decided to sneak him across the border in her pickup. He would join the thousands upon thousands of other undocumented Mexicans in the United States. She called him Houdini because he kept trying to escape. The first day on the road, he raised the cage door with his powerful beak. The second day, he pulled up the cage floor. The third day, he made a hole in the wire screening. On the fourth, he tried to flee through the roof, but he no longer had the strength. Houdini wouldn't eat or utter a sound. On hunger strike and in mutinous silence, he died. Frogs. They say a girl's kiss will turn a frog into a prince. Frogs don't seem all that kissable, but there are girls who have tried. It hasn't worked. But when pesticides kiss a frog, it turns into a monster. In the past, little frogs rarely turned out deformed, but the rare has become commonplace in the lakes of Minnesota, the woods of Pennsylvania, and elsewhere. Fewer and fewer frogs develop at all, and more emerge without eyes or with an extra leg or one leg missing. By the time frogs had their fatal date with chemicals, they lived between water and land for millions of years, beginning on the remote day when the song of the first frog broke the world's silence. Seeds. In Brazil, peasant farmers asked, "Why are there so many people without land when there is so much land without people?" The answer came by bullet. Fear was their only inheritance, and they lost it. They kept on asking questions and taking land and committing the crime of wanting to work. In their millions, they asked, why are chemicals allowed to torture the earth? What will happen to us if seeds are no longer seeds? At the beginning of 2001, landless peasants invaded an experimental plot planted with genetically modified seeds belonging to the Monsanto Corporation in Rio Grande do Sul. They left not one artificial soy plant standing. The plantation was called Na Me Toke, do not touch. Herbs. For heartburn, tomatoes peeled and grilled. For indigestion, boiled leaves of tepozan. For muscle aches, ointments of maguey, India rubber, or cooked cactus pears. Cactus flesh and sarsaparilla purified the blood. Pea pods cleansed the kidneys, and pine nuts purged the intestines. 5-fingered flowers from the tree of little hands gave the heart serenity and courage. The conquistadores found these novelties in Mexico. They carried them back to Spain, along with other herbs with unpronounceable Indian names that relieved fever, killed parasites, soothed the urinary tract, countered the poison of snake bites. Ancient American pharmacology was well received in Europe. A few years later, the Holy Inquisition unleashed its dogs. Knowledge of plants was a tool of witches and demons disguised as doctors, who deserved the rack or the stake. Beneath their exotic robes lay the cloven hoof of the malignant one. Brews and unguents from America came from hell, as did the fires of chocolate and the smoke of tobacco, which incited sinning in another's bed. Likewise, the devilish mushrooms pagans ate to float in the air by the cunning evil of their idolatries. The Lady Who Heals. Is this mountain really a mountain? Or is it a woman? Monumental breasts, curved knees, lying in the sun. In the Navajo language, her name is Diichiti. Clouds showed her body, from which sprout herbs that offer cures or consolation. Her insides are made of pumice. The company Arizona Tuffelite has nibbled away at her for years, laying bare her raw flesh. Not much is left of her green skin. The great wounds are visible for miles. The pace of excavation has picked up since fashion deemed the new must look old, and jeans worn soft by pumice became all the rage. But so has the pace of protest, and this time the many voices became a single thunderclap. United were the Navajo, Hopi, Hualapai, Diné, Zuni, and other peoples forever divided by those who rule over them, and the company had to depart. As the new millennium commenced, the Indians began to heal the Lady Who Heals them. The Lady Who Listens. At the same time, thousands of leagues to the south, bullets chased the Uwa Indians off their land in the mountains of Samore. Helicopters and ground troops cleared the way for Occidental Petroleum, and the Colombian press hailed this advanced party of progress in a hostile environment. When the drills set to work, experts declared the wells would produce no fewer than 400 million barrels of oil. Every day at dawn and dusk, the Indians gathered on the misty peaks to chant their incantations. After a year, the company had spent $60 million and had found not a drop of oil. The Uwa proved once more that the earth is not deaf. She heard their pleas and hid the oil, her black blood, so the trees would not die, the grass would not wither, the springs would not be poisoned. In their language, Uwa means people who think. The gentleman who speaks. Not long ago, in the Valley of Mexico, a mountain erupted. Clouds of flame, rocks on fire, blistering ash. Popocatépetl vomited the stones that had stopped up its mouth, which was as wide as 4 soccer fields. Evacuating the nearby towns was almost impossible. No, people said, he is good, he won't harm us. The locals have always eaten and drunk with Don Popo. They offer him tortillas, tequila, and music, and they ask him for rain, for the beans and corn, and for protection against hail and evil winds in the air and in life. He answers through the mouths of the masters of time, who listen to him while they dream and then recount his words. That's the custom. But this time Popo gave no warning. The masters of time did not know that the volcano was choking, that it had had enough of talking through other mouths. The volcano spoke his piece. He killed no one. In one town on the slopes, 3 weddings took place on the night of the eruption, as if nothing were amiss. The red glow from above lit up the ceremonies. The gentleman who remained silent. In colonial times, Cerro Rico and Potosi produced much silver and many widows. For over 2 centuries, in the freezing heights of South America, Europe observed a Western Christian ritual. Day after day, night after night, Europe fed the mountain human flesh in exchange for silver. For every 10 Indians who entered the mouths of the shafts, 7 never came out. The killings occurred in Bolivia, which did not yet have that name, so that the dawn of capitalism, which also did not yet have that name, could occur in Europe. Today, Cerro Rico is hollow, his silver long gone. In the Indians' language, Potosi means to thunder or to explode. Tradition has it that the mountain would thunder when wounded. Now empty, he remains silent. First lessons. From moles we learn to make tunnels. From beavers we learn to make dams. From birds we learn to build homes. From spiders we learn to weave. From tree trunks rolling downhill we learned about wheels. From tree trunks floating and adrift we learned about boats. From wind we learn about sails. How do we learn our evil ways? From whom do we learn to torment our neighbors and subdue the earth? Judgment Day. I can't get the feeling out of my head that at some point we'll all face Judgment Day. I imagine being interrogated by prosecutors who point their fins or branches, accusing us of turning the kingdom of this world into a desert of stone. What have you done to the planet? Do you think you bought it at the supermarket? Who gave you the right to kill us? I see a high tribunal of flora and fauna handing down the sentence, eternal damnation to the human species. Will the innocent pay as well as the guilty? Will we all spend eternity in hell, roasting on a slow fire alongside the fat cats who actually poison the earth, the water, and the air? I used to think Judgment Day was God's business. Black sun, blood moon, divine rage. If worst came to worst, I'd have to share an interminable barbecue with serial killers, TV stars, and book critics. Now, by comparison, that seems like nothing. Map of time. Some 4.5 billion years ago, give or take a year, a dwarf star spit out a planet now called Earth. Some 4,200,000,000 years ago, the first cell took a sip of sea broth and liked it. Then the first cell divided in two so it would have someone to offer a drink. Some 4 million years ago and a bit, woman and man, all but apes, rose up on their legs and embraced, and for the first time experienced the joy and panic of looking into each other's eyes while doing so. Some 450,000 years ago, woman and man struck two stones together and lit the first fire, which helped them battle fear and cold. Some 300,000 years ago, woman and man spoke the first words and believed they understood each other. And there we are still, wanting to be two, dying of fear, dying of cold, searching for words. Silence. A long table of friends in a restaurant called Plataforma was Tom Yabin's refuge from the noonday sun and the noisy streets of Rio de Janeiro. One day, Tom sat in the corner drinking beer with Zé Fernando Balbi. The two shared a straw hat, which they wore by turns. Tom one day, Zé Fernando the next. And they shared a few other things as well. No, said Tom, when someone came by. I'm in the middle of an important conversation. And when another friend approached, you'll have to excuse me, but we have a lot to talk about. Once more, sorry, but we're discussing a serious matter. Off in the corner, Tom and Zé Fernando said not a word. Zé Fernando was having one of those rotten days that ought to be crossed off the calendar and erased from memory, and Tom was keeping him company with silent beers. They stayed that way, immersed in the music of silence, from noon to dusk. The restaurant was empty when they got up and ambled to the door. The word. In the jungle of the upper Parana, the trucker warned me to be careful. Keep your eye out for savages, he said. There are still a few on the loose. He told me this in Spanish, but that wasn't his language. The trucker spoke Guarani, the tongue of the savages he feared and scorned. Strange thing, Paraguay speaks the language of the vanquished. And stranger still, the vanquished believe and continue to believe that words are sacred. A lie insults whatever it names, but truth reveals its soul. The vanquished believe the soul resides in the words it speaks. If I give my word, I give myself. The tongue is not a garbage dump. The ink. The chroniclers of the conquest of America outdid themselves praising the rare fruit, never before seen or tasted, that Mexican Indians called aguacal and Peruvians palta. They wrote that it was shaped like a pear and looked like the breast of a fair damsel, that it grew untended in the forest with God as its gardener, that its delicate flesh, neither sweet nor sour, buttered the mouth, restored the sick, and roused the lazy, and nothing better kindled the fires of love. The fruit, meanwhile, took these homages as its due, and to keep them from fading she offered the incredible ink of her seeds. The praise was written in avocado ink. Instructions for reading the paper. General Francisco Serrano of Mexico was settled in an easy chair at the Serrano Army Casino, smoking and reading. He was reading the news. The paper was upside down. President Alvaro Obregón was curious. Do you always read the paper upside down? The general nodded. And could I ask why? From experience, Mr. President. From experience. Instructions for a successful career. 1,000 years ago, the Sultan of Persia said, "How delicious!" He was eating his first eggplant, sliced and dressed with ginger and Nile herbs. The court poet praised the eggplant for the pleasure it brings to the palate and the bedroom, for the miraculous feats of love that outshine the wonders of powdered tiger's tooth and grated rhinoceros horn. Mouthfuls later, the Sultan said, "What garbage!" The court poet then cursed the perfidious eggplant for the torments it wreaks on stomach and brain, for the delirium and insanity that brings virtuous men to ruin. A minute ago you had eggplant in paradise, now you're sending it to hell, commented one astute observer. And the poet, an early prophet of mass media, set things straight. I am the courtier of the Sultan, not the courtier of the eggplant. Against the current. The ideas in the weekly Marcha tended to be read. Its balance sheet was a whole lot redder. Hugo Alfaro, besides being a journalist, sometimes filled in as manager and had the demoralizing task of paying the bills. Once in a great while, Hugo would jump for joy. "We've got the issue covered." Advertisers had come through. In the world of independent journalism, a miracle of that order is celebrated as proof that God exists. But the editor, Carlos Quijano, would blanch. Horror of horrors. There was no news as bad as that news. To run advertisements meant sacrificing a page or more. He needed every sacred calm inch to question certainties, yank off masks, stir up hornets' nests, and help make tomorrow more than just another name for today. After 34 years in print, Marcha ceased to exist when the military dictatorship that overran Uruguay put an end to such lunacy. The hat maker. The telephone rang. I heard a gruff voice say, "I can't believe the mistake you made." "Listen, I'm not kidding. Mistakes happen and can happen to anyone, but not like that." My heart sank. I couldn't speak. My book on soccer had just come out, and in my country, everyone has a PhD on the subject. I closed my eyes and prepared for the worst. "The 1930 World Cup," said the raspy, relentless voice. "Yes," I mumbled. "It was in July." "Yes?" "And what's the weather like in Montevideo in July?" "Cold?" "Very cold," the voice corrected. Then the attack. "And you wrote that the stadium was a sea of straw hats." "Straw?" "Felt! They were felt!" The voice calmed down, recollected. "I was there that afternoon. We won 4-2. I can see it now. But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I'm a hat maker, and have been all my life. And a lot of those hats were mine." The hat. Whenever he wore his hat, Manuel Zaccaria looked in the mirror and saw nothing but his hat. The poet knew that it made him invisible. The rest of Havana disagreed, but the poet didn't think much of other people's opinions. With his hat on, Manuel would barge into homes and bars, kiss forbidden lips, and eat the food of others without the least concern for the furies he unleashed. And in July, when the city boiled, he would walk the streets wearing not a stitch besides the hat and pay no attention to the stones thrown at him. As long as they missed his hat, he felt nothing. The hat sauntering through the air was the only part of him that would live on after he died. Flies. Jose Miguel Corchado's body is chock full of questions. Years ago, he lost count of the relentless questions that pester him, but he remembers the day the first one worked its way inside him. It happened in Seville on a sunny afternoon, redolent, as you might imagine, with the fragrance of orange blossoms. An afternoon like all others, at the end of a working day, like all other working days. He was alone, walking home through the crowd, immersed in a solitude like all other solitudes, when up popped the first question, buzzing like a fly. He tried to chase it away, but it kept circling around until it got under his skin and refused to come out. That night he couldn't sleep. The following day, Jose Miguel sat in the chair and declared, "I'm not moving an inch until I know who I am." Points of view. Somewhere in time, beyond time, the world was gray. Thanks to the Ishir Indians who stole color from the gods, the world today is resplendent with colors that dazzle the eyes of all who look at them. Ticio Escobar lent a hand to a film crew that came to the Chaco to shoot scenes of daily life among the Ishir. An Indian girl pursued the director, a silent shadow glued to his side, staring into his face as if she wanted to jump into his strange blue eyes. The director turned to Ticio, who knew the girl and understood her language. Through him, she confessed, "I want to know what colors you see." The director smiled, "The same as you." "And how do you know what colors I see?" Memory in stone. In the depths of a cave by the Pinturas River, a hunter pressed his blood-stained hand to the stone wall. The handprint marked a moment of truce between the urgency of killing and the terror of dying. Some time later, next to that print, another hunter laid his soot-blackened hand, and other hunters followed, leaving a stone wall dotted with prints the color of blood, ashes, earth, or plants. 13,000 years later, near the Venturas River in the town of Perito Moreno, someone writes on a wall, "I was here." Kites. The rainy season is ending, the weather cooling off, the corn ripe and ready in the fields, and the kite artists of the town of Santiago Zacate are giving their creations a final touch. The largest, prettiest kites in the world are the work of many hands, and each is unique. When the Day of the Dead dawns, these immense birds of paper plumage take flight and soar until they break free of the strings that hold them and vanish into the heavens. On the ground, at every graveside, people tell their dead relatives the latest gossip. The dead don't answer. They're busy enjoying the spectacle on high, where kites in the sky have the good fortune of becoming wind.